is Emily Mingus. I am the coordinator of the Respect Life group here at St. Joan of Arc. We're so pleased that you all are here. I'm going to begin in a prayer, because I feel we're doing a church thing, so we might as well pray to the Lord first and foremost, and then we'll get going. So, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us together tonight. Thank you for the gift of life, the sanctity of life. From conception until natural death, we pray, Lord, that this time together is educational, is fruitful, and brings us to greater understanding of the love that you have for each one of us, and how we can share that amongst ourselves, amongst close friends and family, amongst strangers, and reminding each of us as we turn inward that we too are temples of the Holy Spirit. We thank you, Lord, and all together let's say one Hail Mary. Hail
Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. One other thing to note before we get started, there is a group at Noblesville High School. I don't have all the details right in my head, so Monica, I might look to you. But they are not being allowed to have a Respect Life group, and so they were actually taken to court, and they have a next step tomorrow. So if we could just pray for them as well, that they're able to share their voices and to respect life within their own community, whether Catholic or not. So just keep them in your hearts as well. And without further ado, here's our speaker.
Thanks everybody for having me. I'm excited to be here. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Mary Kate Zander. My in-laws actually go to this parish. So if you were wondering why they had the Illinois Right to Life person come to speak, that's the connection there. So I'm excited to share this with you all. A little bit of background on this presentation. At Illinois Right to Life, one of our programs is we do what we call the Ground Zero Tour. So in the fall every year we go around and do educational events like this, mostly at churches and schools. And we pick a topic that's relevant and we present on it. So last fall I did this presentation about 20 different parishes in different parts of Illinois. I've adapted it to make it relevant to Indiana, and it's highly relevant to Indiana, so it's actually really exciting for me to have this opportunity to delve into some of this data and some of these details. It's a little bleak. So I know in Indiana, you guys are much more pro-life state than Illinois is. But I think there are some really important realities here that as pro-life people and as pro-life Catholics, we really have to be aware of, because the fight is not over just because we live in a pro-life state. So I live in the Chicago area, but for all you guys. So I'm happy to share this with you and get this presentation started. So I kind of like to break it out in 4 different parts for you so you know what to expect. Context is really important from my perspective. I think that when we're looking at the pro-life environment right now, or the abortion environment rather, in the United States and specifically in the Midwest, we have to look at the whole picture of what has happened in the country really since 2016. That's really when a lot of change began to occur. So that's the first thing. We'll go through a timeline of events on just kind of laying out that context, what happened both nationally and then also what's been happening here in the region, specifically in Illinois and Indiana as neighboring states. So after that, we'll talk a little bit about abortion tourism. Abortion tourism is the hot topic in Illinois right now because we have seen such a significant increase in the number of women traveling to Illinois to receive abortions. And most of those women who are traveling from out of state are traveling from Indiana. So we'll talk about that. And then third, we'll talk about some data that we were given access to back in the spring from some health insurance companies. And I'll get a little bit into why we have this data, what it tells us, and some of the key takeaways that we as an organization have taken from this data. And then finally, a state versus federal response. So this has also kind of been a hot topic nationally right now, particularly with the presidential race. Obviously, President Trump has said, Roe v. Wade's been overturned. Now it's the state's problem. I'm not touching abortion at the federal level. And me personally, I have an issue with that. But I think when we, as pro-life people, pro-life Catholics in the United States, look at this whole picture, I think we all have to really take issue with that, because it's not enough to say that the states are now responsible for their own state territories. So we'll get into that at the end too, and then I'm happy to take questions at the end as well. Just a very brief overview of our organization so you kind of understand where we're coming from. So Illinois Right to Life, we're a twofold organization. We kind of have two organizations in one. We're not affiliated with National Right to Life, so we're one of the independent Right to Life organizations. Illinois Right to Life, the main organization is an education-focused organization, so our mission is events like this. We're educating the public on abortion, specifically in the state of Illinois and in the Midwest. Illinois Right to Life Action is essentially our lobbying organization. So we employ the only two full-time pro-life lobbyists in Springfield, Illinois, in the capital, Ralph and Molly. Ralph's been doing this for 40 plus years. So if you're pro-life in Illinois, you've probably heard Ralph's name at some point. But it's pretty incredible because he just is really a wealth of knowledge for us, and he has a lot of stories to share. So we're happy to have him. So that's just the brief rundown of our organizations. That's me. So I was the executive director of Illinois Right to Life for about 5 years. Starting in 2018, they hired me when I was 25, and they were desperate to find somebody, and I was way too young for the job for sure. But they gave me the opportunity, and it's just been awesome. So I actually left my full-time role as executive director in spring of this year. Our president had been president of the board for 20 years, and she was ready to leave. So I stepped into her role as board president. So I now serve in a volunteer capacity, which my husband can attest in a lot of ways has been better. Although I don't get paid for any of it, but that's okay, it's worth it. Our old board president used to say she was taking time off of purgatory when she would do Illinois Right to Life work. So I guess that's my deal now too. So just a couple goals so that you all kind of understand what I hope to, that you'll all get from this talk. So first and foremost, I hope to articulate the abortion industry's national strategy when we're looking at how the dynamics and how the environment has changed over the last almost 10 years now. It's hard to believe, 2016. So really the last decade, what their strategy has been. I mean, you'll see when we get into the context, they knew that Roe v. Wade was going to be overturned, and they were preparing for that for years. Specifically in Illinois, they were preparing for that for years before it actually occurred. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I really want to give you a realistic picture of abortion in Illinois. And the reason for that is not just because it's the state I'm coming from, but also because there are a lot of Indiana women who are traveling to Illinois to receive their abortions. And abortion it's the Wild West in Illinois. There's no rules, there's no regulations, and not only that, they've actually gone the extra mile to make sure that abortionists are protected, that state law enforcement have no access to data that would help us, chase down abusers that are taking women to abortion clinics, etc. So that's a big one that I want you to come away with as well. Third, I want to really hone in on the relevancy for pro-life states like Indiana in particular. Last June, so this was not this June, but about a year and a half ago now, I went to, there's a pro-life conference at Notre Dame in June every summer, if you can believe it, on Notre Dame's campus. And I was actually a little bit disappointed when I was there because it's all these national groups that come together and they send a representative, and I just felt like it was kind of a big party that everyone was celebrating that Roe v. Wade had been overturned. And I kind of felt like, okay, but what about Illinois? You guys are sending all of your women to our state to get abortions now. So what are we going to do about this? And so I think that it's a hard truth, but it's a very important truth that pro-life states in particular need to be told, which is the fight is not over because your state has a ban on abortion in some capacity. And so we have to talk about that. So that's the relevancy here. And then fourth, I want to actually argue for a federal approach to eradicating abortion. So again, we're hearing President Trump talk about how it's a state issue. I want to really make the case that that is not enough. We need to have federal policy that limits and bans entirely eventually abortion in the United States. So our timeline of events, I'm going to try to, the timeline gets a little long, but I'm going to try to run through this as quickly as possible, and I tried to condense it before I came in. So in 2016, we had the death of Antonin Scalia. I don't know about you all, but I remember exactly where I was, exactly what I was doing when I saw on Twitter that Antonin Scalia had died. And that really began sort of this avalanche that I think the abortion industry saw the writing on the wall of, wow, we might actually find ourselves with a conservative court in the next decade. So not long after that happened, obviously Donald Trump won the presidency. And if you remember around this time, there was a lot of debate over whether Obama should fill that seat or it should be President Trump. And even conservatives were kind of on the fence because we were like, okay, if Hillary Clinton wins, do we really want Hillary Clinton to be the person to appoint someone to this place? Obviously, Donald Trump won, so the rest is history. Neil Gorsuch was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court not long after that, and was approved without too much trouble, which obviously Brett Kavanaugh didn't have that luxury. And then not long after that, and you'll see that this timeline, it kind of, there's sort of two things that run parallel. There's the policy piece, and then there's also the rules and regulations with regards to chemical abortion. So while this is all going on, the FDA, which was still an Obama holdover FDA at the time, they approved the use of RU-486 chemical abortion up to 10 weeks. So prior to this, chemical abortion had only been approved up to 7 weeks. And there wasn't a change in the science, there wasn't a change in the dosage, there was no change that suggested that women could suddenly tolerate chemical abortion up to 10 weeks gestation. It was truly just a political move, that they wanted more time, they wanted a larger window. So that was the purpose for this change. So jumping ahead over 2017 to 2018, we have the retirement of Anthony Kennedy. And same thing, now we have another vacancy, and we have the appointment of Brett Kavanaugh. So again, the appointment of Brett Kavanaugh, for those of you who remember when Clarence Thomas was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court, it was like, I think, kind of a lot of the same crap going on. That was obviously a circus. Praise be to God that all ended the way that it did. But now looking back, we can see clearly that they all knew that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was not well. If you all recall, she was very sick on and off for a long time. And they knew this would not be the last of Donald Trump's Supreme Court appointees. So Brett Kavanaugh is approved despite all the craziness. 2019, the Reproductive Health Act is introduced and passed in Illinois. And this is the big indicator from the national stage that they're starting to put the ball in motion to prepare the states for Roe v. Wade to be overturned. So the Reproductive Health Act was not written by Illinois legislators, it was written by NARAL, and the ACLU came together and wrote this legislation. They introduced it not just in Illinois, they also introduced it in Minnesota, California, New York, some of the more liberal states that they knew they could get this passed. And their selling point was, we want to clean up the law. There are so many laws that were previously on the books in Illinois with regards to abortion that are no longer relevant. We're just gonna clean it all up. So we're just gonna clear the books. We're gonna get everything off of the books in terms of abortion law in Illinois. Well, what they weren't telling people is that Illinois was a trigger state. So Illinois had an abortion criminalization law on the books. It said it's a crime in the state of Illinois to perform or procure an abortion. And they wanted to be rid of that because they knew that it would trigger a legislative action if Roe v. Wade was overturned. So not only did they repeal that law, which had been on the books for many, many years and just wasn't being enforced since Roe v. Wade had been ruled on, the RHA did a whole slew of other things. It changed the way that abortion clinics are categorized. So abortion clinics no longer had to be inspected by the Department of Public Health. They no longer had to be licensed by the Department of Public Health. They're licensed with just a general business license. So there's no check on sanitation, there's no check on cleanliness standards. No one goes into abortion clinics in Illinois to look at them whatsoever. It changed the way that coroners are allowed to go in and investigate if there's a death in a facility. So the way that the coroner interacts with the abortion clinic is highly regulated. They're basically just not allowed to go in and investigate if a death occurs inside of an abortion clinic. There's a whole slew of things. I could go on and on. And all of this is their attempt to make Illinois a regional oasis for abortion. They want it to be absolutely promised that abortion will be available in Illinois if Roe v. Wade is overturned. So not long after that, the FDA approves a generic form of mifepristone. So mifepristone is RU486, the chemical abortion pill. Mifepristone was the name brand, and the FDA, once again, they're expanding this window. They're making chemical abortion as accessible to women as possible because they see the writing on the wall. They see that soon enough, abortion is not going to be accessible to women in more than half of the country, which is the situation that we find ourselves in now. So they're going to open up the chemical abortion window as much as they possibly can because that's the way to get women in and get those babies aborted. 2020, the COVID pandemic begins, feels irrelevant, but it's actually highly relevant because not long after the pandemic started, if you all remember, we were all afraid to go anywhere, let alone doctor's offices, which is the number one place that you would have encountered another sick person. So they changed the telecare rules. They changed all the rules around virtual care for medicine. And the abortion industry saw this opportunity and said, well, if women have to go to the OBGYN or they can have a virtual call with their OBGYN, they should also be able to get prescription chemical abortion through virtual care as well. So this was what triggered mail order abortions in the United States. So not long after that, we had the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Once again, I always say during this point, there's like 3 people that I remember exactly where I was and exactly what I was doing when they died, and one is Michael Jackson, one is Antonin Scalia, and the other one is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because it was like, that wow, this is the moment. Donald Trump is going to fill yet a 3rd seat on the U.S. Supreme Court. So they appointed Amy Coney Barrett. Brilliant appointment, brilliant nominee, because what can they possibly accuse her of? She's a mom. She has 7 or 8 kids, and she's from Indiana, isn't she? Maybe not. She worked in Notre Dame, yeah, something like that. So anyway, so that was all great. And then Joe Biden wins the 2020 election. So once again, now we start to see things shift in another direction. So the Supreme Court, in the meantime, they reinstated the RU486 rule with regards to telecare. They said, okay, previously the rule was a woman had to have a direct encounter with her doctor. She had to receive that medication from her doctor. You couldn't even get it in a retail pharmacy. Now, obviously with COVID, the rule had changed that a nurse could prescribe it over the computer, and she could go pick it up from some location. And the Supreme Court came back and said, okay, we're done with that. You can't do that anymore. The Biden administration then came back and said, well, that's fine, but we're not going to enforce that rule. So we don't really care what the Supreme Court thinks, is basically what they said. So this is, presently kind of where it stands. They've continued to just not enforce this rule. In 2021, Dobbs versus Jackson is filed in Mississippi. So Dobbs versus Jackson is obviously the landmark case that would go on to overturn Roe v. Wade. It's really interesting because I remember during this time, there was always conversation around what's going to be the case that's going to overturn Roe. And all the really impressive legal experts that are involved with pro-life across the country, they were constantly in conversation about what's the right case, and all the different states had brought their cases up and had filed all these different cases, and the Supreme Court had numerous pro-life abortion-related cases available that they could have said, okay, this is the one we're going to choose. Dobbs versus Jackson, they handpicked to rule on this case, and I believe it's because they knew that this was the case that would effectively overturn not just Roe v. Wade, but also Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And that's exactly what happened. So, of course, prior to hearing that Roe's overturned, the outcome was leaked. This is the only time in U.S. history that this has ever happened, which again, I think for all of us should be the writing on the wall that this is, we're obviously not in a civil war, but holy smokes, if there were going to be an issue that were going to take us to that point in modern times, I think that this has the potential to be it. And we see that with the way that with people's behavior around this particular time, around this particular case. So they announced that the Dobbs ruling was delivered and Roe was overturned. And immediately the only restriction left on the books in Illinois with regards to abortion was parental notification. The Illinois legislature immediately removes it from the books. So the law was, it wasn't parent permission. You don't have to have, your parent doesn't have to give permission for you as a minor girl in the state of Illinois to receive an abortion. They just have to be notified. And, how do you even enforce that? Like, how do you enforce? The abortion clinics are effectively enforcing themselves at that point. The Illinois legislature, nonetheless, didn't want it on the books. So they repealed that law. You no longer need parent notification in order to receive an abortion as a minor. And then not long after that, we saw that Tennessee, Indiana are among the first of Illinois' neighbors to ban abortion. And it's interesting because I remember around this time, I had taken a brief hiatus from Illinois Right to Life, and I was working for a consultant that works primarily with pregnancy centers. And one of our clients that I was assigned to is in Memphis, Tennessee. And they had just found out that Roe v. Wade was overturned, that their ban was going to be put into effect. And it's just amazing how the conversation immediately changed, because the conversation went from how do we, convince these women to come in and have a conversation with us and hear about our resources. The conversation went from that to how do we catch these women before Planned Parenthood puts them on the Metro train or the Amtrak train and sends them up to Carbondale, Illinois to be referred for an abortion at the Planned Parenthood in Carbondale. And that's the situation that they found themselves in. So it's no longer a counseling conversation, it's now a conversation of how do we prevent these women from going somewhere else to receive their abortions. And in that light, so Carbondale and Fairview Heights, Illinois are kind of the two hot spots for abortion travel from, at least from the southernmost part of the region. So Carbondale, Illinois, 3 abortion providers opened within just a couple of months of the start of 2023. And again, because we saw it's just such an easy travel hub. Women can take a train, they can fly to Carbondale, they can drive to Carbondale. So that's where we saw a lot of that. I don't have this on the timeline, but Fairview Heights is down near St. Louis in Missouri. That's another big hotspot in Illinois. There's a lot of abortion clinics right on the border there because Missouri is also an abortion-free state. And in 2019, I believe it was, so this was early, this was years before a lot of this, before Roe v. Wade was overturned and a lot of what this had occurred. Planned Parenthood opened a huge mega center. They refer to it as a regional care center, just outside, just over the border from Missouri on the Illinois side. And they had fitted this facility to perform 11,000 abortions per year, which at the time my understanding was that was going to be the 3rd largest abortion provider in the country. And again, it's a travel hub. St. Louis, people can get there by plane, by train, by car. And they knew that they knew that Missouri would be one of the first states to ban abortion. So that's exactly what they did. So 2023, the Illinois legislature begins the year by propping up abortion tourism even more than they had previously. So they passed a law that basically said if you are a disgraced abortion provider from a state that has since passed a pro-life law, and you've lost your license as a result. So, some of these states, obviously Indiana being an example, if a doctor performs an abortion prior to 22 weeks, I don't know the exact stipulation, but I would assume that that doctor would be punished for that because it's against the law. If a doctor in Indiana loses their license for doing that, they can go to Illinois. Illinois will honor their license and provide them a temporary medical license for 2 years. And not only that, but they will actually fund the opening of their new facility. So they have put forth all these grants that basically say, if you're an abortion provider and you're in a pro-life state, come to Illinois, you can come for free. And we'll help you, set up shop. And that was all a result of this bill. So not long after that, Governor Pritzker allocates $23 million to abortion in Illinois. So he set up a $10 million hotline for abortion seekers, an $8 million, he set up an $8 million training program for abortionists, and $5 million in grants for abortion providers. So again, this is all to make Illinois as palatable a business environment for abortion as possible. They want to attract as many abortionists as they can get their hands on. And then of course, the Indiana abortion ban went into effect not long after that. So obviously there are some things that have happened in the last year since then, but this is really, I think, where we start to see things materialize in their current form. Since then, so I'll give you a little bit of context too with the way that this the way that this presentation is outlined. This section on abortion tourism, a lot of what is in this section was all based on information that we had gotten from public statements that Planned Parenthood had made, and just a lot of like data gathering from the people who pray in front of the abortion clinics. If that's any of you, you know, you get a lot of information from standing in front of a building, you know, for hours at a time, talking to people that are coming in and out. So that's where we got a lot of this information initially. The third part of this presentation is data that we actually received from healthcare companies. So we actually have we've been able to affirm a lot of what in this was, you could say speculatory, but I don't even know that it's a little bit harder data than that. So a national breakdown of abortion tourism. So this is a map taken from the Guttmacher Institute. So the Guttmacher Institute, if you're unfamiliar, is Planned Parenthood's research arm. This map, the dark purple color, the burgundy color is the pro-life states, essentially. It says most restrictive here for their purposes, but so we have the pro-life states, and then as the colors become more blue, those are the most protective states of abortion. So obviously Oregon is the most protective state in the nation. Illinois, it's funny, they consider Illinois to be protective and not very protective or most protective. The primary reason for that largely has to do with the fact that in Illinois, you can legally have an elective abortion, so that's no quote-unquote medical necessity. You can have an elective abortion up to 26 weeks. Totally unscientific number. They literally just like picked it out of a hat. 26 weeks you can have, for context, I'm 25 weeks pregnant and I look pretty pregnant. So that's pretty wild. You can have an elective abortion. I could walk into an abortion clinic today and get an abortion and no one would ask me any questions. After 26 weeks in Illinois, technically you have to have a reason that's either health of the mother or, I always forget the phrase, it's, you know, the prognosis of the fetus, essentially. And, but they define, and this is the clincher here, is, so there's a loophole. They define health of the mother as basically anything you can possibly conceive that a woman might have, in terms of like financial issues, mental health issues. If you can convince your doctor that this pregnancy is going to affect your health, you can get an abortion through the third trimester in Illinois. So they deny that. They say that that's not what it is, but I mean, it's literally written into the law that way, that there's just about any possible reason you can imagine that they would allow you to get an abortion. So that's why we see this, but nevertheless, the point in this slide is simply that Illinois is the friendliest to abortion of any state in the region, for sure. So same map, I've added some lines here to sort of illustrate for you just a couple of things. So these are just a few examples of where we know abortion providers have moved from other states into Illinois for the sake of taking advantage of these tax credits and grants and all these other things that Governor Pritzker has provided. So Tennessee is an example, not so much of an abortion provider who's moved, but they are now, Planned Parenthood in Memphis is now referring all of their patients up to Carbondale. So when they have a woman come in who needs an abortion after 10 weeks or whatever it is, they tell her to go get on a train, take the train up to Carbondale, and she can be back from her abortion in a couple of days. Indiana, so this was a really big one when it was happening in Danville, Illinois, just across the border. There's an abortion clinic that was opened by LaDonna Prince, I believe is her name. I kind of tried to do some follow-up on some of these details because I thought her original clinic was in Indianapolis, but it might be in South Bend. But so she basically, her solution to the Indiana abortion ban was, I'm just going to set up a second office across the border in Illinois, and when I have my patients come in to my Indiana clinic, I'm going to refer them to myself across the border in Illinois. So that's what she's done in Danville. And this was a huge deal. I mean, the mayor was involved when everyone found out, because they're never honest. They never file all the paperwork for their new business under the actual name. They always have some sort of shell company or something like that. And so by the time that everyone found out that this is what she was doing, she was opening this abortion clinic in a community that has literally never had an abortion clinic before. By that point, she had already, the lease had been signed. She'd already started moving stuff in. I think that's how they figured it out. I think the business contractor that was working on the building was like, hold on a second here, what exactly am I working on? So that's what she does. She spends a couple days a week in Indiana and a couple days a week in Illinois performing second and third trimester abortions. Ohio, similar situation. A doctor in Ohio, once again, saw the business opportunity, and he decided to move his family from Ohio to Illinois to take advantage of all the perks that Governor Pritzker was kind of laying out for everyone. This one I really like to talk about because he said in a news article that wrote a story about him, his clinic opened up in Champaign, which is obviously where the University of Illinois is. And his comment was, I'm doing this to serve the underserved. I want to serve an underserved community. Okay, there are 3 abortion clinics in Champaign, and it's on a college campus. So the underserved, right? It's just absurd. It's clearly a business opportunity for him. He can see that this is his bread and butter clientele are college students. So there's that one, and then this California one's really interesting because obviously California is not a pro-life state. They weren't necessarily motivated by a ban or by their state closing down their business. I think it was more about an expansion of their business. So they said, we're going to open up a second location in Illinois, and our abortion providers are going to fly back and forth between the 2 states and take appointments, on alternating days. So this one actually, I'm happy to say, once the local community found out that this was going on, I think the landlord kicked them out, and they kind of saw that they were not going to be welcome there, and they did not circle back on it. So they actually did not open. But again, I think it's a testament to this notion of a business opportunity for them. This was this was a map that was a little bit more speculative, that we've since confirmed some of these details. These are some of the cities that we were pretty sure women were traveling from into Illinois to receive their abortions. But these next slides give a little more context to this. So the way that we receive this data, essentially what happened here is health insurance companies all across the country have to submit, when they submit an insurance claim or when they file an insurance claim, it goes through a clearinghouse. There are 40 different clearinghouses that are approved by the US government all across the country. And it's a big deal to get approved. You have to go through this whole vetting process. And these clearinghouses are privately owned. So once they receive this health insurance claim data, this doesn't sound real, but I promise it's really bizarre, it's real. Once they receive this data, as long as that they're HIPAA compliant and everything is redacted, they can do whatever they want with your health insurance data. So they sell it to pharmaceutical companies and manufacturers and what have you. And there is a clearinghouse that happens to be owned by a pro-life Catholic out there somewhere. I don't know what it is or who the person is. But a friend of mine told me that he was paying a couple $100,000 a month to have access to this health insurance data for the various projects that he was working on. He runs a consulting firm. And he offered to give me access to all of the abortion data that he had on Illinois between the years 2019 and 2024 for $4,000, which I was like, that's pretty darn good in my opinion. So we did it, and we got the data, and he helped us assess it and kind of pick it apart. And there were a lot of key takeaways. There's some key context that's worth mentioning here. So the first is that 92% of the population has health insurance in some capacity. So we know that this data, if it's completely understood and assessed correctly, which it's a lot of data and it's very confusing, it's hard to get to that point. We know that 92% of the population is represented in what we see. That being said, the data that we have only represents about 25% of the abortion market. A lot of that has to do with the fact that coding is very confusing. We think that a lot of the abortion providers are coding their abortions as miscarriage care. So there's a lot of discrepancies and a lot of conflation of numbers. So to kind of get away from that, we removed a lot of those to make sure that we weren't, counting miscarriages, for example. So 25% of the abortion market is actually represented in this data. We intentionally removed prescriptions for chemical abortion because, same thing, it was a coding discrepancy. We just weren't sure how they were actually being coded, and we didn't want to inflate the numbers at all. And then abortions paid for in cash are obviously also not represented in this data, so we just have no way of knowing how many abortions are actually being performed, but are being paid for with cash. Another important piece of context for all of you is that in Illinois, abortion is taxpayer funded, so you can be on state Medicaid and receive an abortion and have that paid for. It's also required by the state that your health insurance provider cover it as well. So in the state of Illinois, abortion is covered on our Illinois Right to Life's insurance plan because it has to be. That's an important piece of context too. So key takeaways, the first key takeaway is that women are traveling from Indiana, Wisconsin, and Texas the most often to Illinois. So you see this map here, and again, this is only representative of, it's actually 2019 through 2023, and it's, let me come around to this side, and it's about 25% of the market. So there were 562 abortions performed on Indiana women who claimed to have come from Indiana. The vast majority of them went to Chicago, which is notable for our purposes. So that is more than double the next highest state, which is Wisconsin. And we can assume that we also see women going into Minnesota for abortions from Wisconsin. Then the third was Texas, which our theory with that is that Texas has a Southwest hub and Illinois also has a Southwest hub. So some of the cheapest flights that you can buy are from Dallas to Chicago. So our theory with that is that it just makes sense for people to make that jump.
How much of that is after Indiana made abortion illegal? A lot of they used to have back in 2019.
You're exactly right. So, and to be clear, this is all prior to the ban being in effect. So these are women who we can assume that these were, I think you all would know better than me, but I think when the Indiana ban was not in effect, what was the week, how many weeks could women go in? Was it 22 weeks? They could have an abortion up to 22 weeks?
In Indiana before it was
Before the ban?
12 or 13.
Oh, really? Okay. So we know that these women were receiving abortions after 13 weeks then, or we can assume that because they were making the trip to Illinois, and because this was all prior to the enactment of the ban. So now that the ban's been enacted, I mean, these numbers are probably significantly more than that.
That's what it is.
Yeah. So I think my slides might be out of order, but so the second key takeaway here is that Medicaid costs were more than $20 million from 2019 to 2023 alone. So these two key takeaways are probably more relevant for people in Illinois, but again, I think it paints a picture for us, and I think it also is important for people in Indiana to understand that that Illinois is currently trying to pass a law that would allow us to pay for all of the abortions of women who come into the state, not just Illinois state residents. So that would be a huge contributing factor to a woman's decision to travel into Illinois from Indiana if she were seeking an abortion, to know that not only can she do that and not be at risk of breaking the law, but she could also have it paid for with Illinois taxpayer dollars. So we saw most of these women traveling into Chicago from Indiana. Again, we see that 562 number right here. This pie chart down here basically represents that 30% of the women who traveled into Illinois from out of state were coming from Indiana. So about a third of those women, which we could do some quick math to figure out how many women, how much this has gone up. Planned Parenthood of Illinois reported just a few months ago that they had seen a 13% increase in the number of women traveling into Illinois from other states. So, I mean, you know, we can do the math on that, but, so that was the second key takeaway. And then, oh wow, sorry, my slides are really out of order here. So this is actually the map that shows the breakdown of Medicaid. So the spending on Medicaid in 2023 significantly increased as well. Our theory on that was that they were illegally paying for out-of-state women to receive abortions with taxpayer money. Through a variety of, you know, the means of analyzing this data, we were told by the guys that did it for us that that did not appear to be the case. There was only one case they could find that was an out-of-state woman who had her abortion paid for with taxpayer money. I personally just don't buy it, because in Illinois law there are no rules that stipulate how they verify whether that woman is actually a resident of the state, and she is able to apply for that aid while she's sitting there in the waiting room. So I don't buy it, but you know, that's just me. And then the third key takeaway, Family Planning Associates, which is a big abortion provider in Chicago, is by far the highest producing clinic. And this is important, again, for our purposes, but I think it's helpful information for all pro-life people to know that this clinic is at the center of like a major bubble zone issue. They're right on a very busy road in Chicago, and so there's always this issue of, you know, the counselor or the sidewalk advocates have to stand across the street if they're not gonna violate that bubble zone law. And they're constantly calling the police on the sidewalk advocates, and it's just, there's constantly a huge issue there. And so what has ultimately occurred is that very rarely are there actually sidewalk advocates present within the general vicinity at that location. So, you know, naturally, if you've seen Unplanned, we know what the outcome of that is. It's that those abortion numbers go up at that location. Yeah, so then we just see here, this is Family Planning Associates, the numbers are just significantly higher. So a state versus federal response, and then after this section, I'll just get through this, and I'm happy to take any questions that you all have. So why a state by state approach won't work? I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I've just read a lot about this. I care a lot about it. I really hate, you can ask my husband, I really hate that Donald Trump and JD Vance keep saying that we don't have to address this at the federal level, because again, I'm in Illinois going, yeah, we actually do, because guess what? A third of our abortions are performed on women who are not from Illinois. So the first issue from my perspective is pro-abortion legislatures are going to exist forever. In the state of Illinois, the Democrats have a supermajority. We will never, I mean, I wouldn't say this if I were in Illinois. It's highly unlikely that we will ever be a pro-life state, at least not in my lifetime. I mean, there's some serious Chicago corruption that would have to change before we would get to that point. And so, for that reason, we will continue to see them passing laws that protect abortion providers over women, that protect clinics over women, and that prevent law enforcement from defending the vulnerable. They actually passed a law about a year ago that the state of Illinois will not participate in the extradition of any person who is found to have participated in an abortion, even if that person was, say, like an adult male who took like a 14-year-old girl to get an abortion because that he had been abusing her. Even if that's the situation, the state of Illinois will not participate in extraditing that person to their home state. So we're protecting all of these people. Law enforcement has also been denied access to, you know, again, it's funny because a lot of these things are not actually happening, but they kind of like write this narrative about pro-life people by creating a lot of these laws. So they created a law that says that law enforcement cannot have access to license plate reader data if the purpose of that is going to be used to track a woman who came from another state into the state to receive an abortion. So again, it's this like notion of, okay, I think they're trying to paint this picture that there are questions around whether a woman who travels into Illinois to receive an abortion could be prosecuted for that in her home state. And so they're trying to scare people and give the appearance of being this like protector of the vulnerable by passing these laws that really ultimately just make it hard for law enforcement to do their job and also protective users, because if a 14-year-old girl, which we know so the last I saw these numbers was 2018. In 2018, the youngest girl to have an abortion in the state of Illinois was 10 years old. And they used to be tracking that. They don't track it anymore. Thank you, Governor Pritzker. So that's that piece. The second is pro-abortion political money. So Planned Parenthood was spending tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on campaigns and political races long before Roe v. Wade was overturned. Now all of that money has been condensed into these states like Illinois that they have no choice but to hold on to these strongholds. And basically what that means is that this supermajority problem that we have is not going anywhere. We just don't have the cash flow. I mean, it's just the unfortunate thing of being on the right side is you just don't have access to that kind of money that they have access to. We don't have the cash flow to win these races. And I mean, in the last 5 years, we have seen them kick out more pro-life legislators in Illinois than I think we've ever seen in a single 5 to 10 year time period. And again, the reason for that is they are pouring millions of dollars into these races in Illinois because they want to be sure that they are not going to have a problem with abortion access in our state. Referendums and ballot initiatives. So this is a hard one. I think it's a hard one for a lot of people to stomach. Missouri is a perfect example of this. Missouri is currently an abortion-free state. Next week, Missouri is going to have a referendum on the ballot that they are publicly, they're allowing people to cast their vote. Do you support abortion or do you not support abortion? That's not what the language is, but that's essentially what the question is. And we know from public polling that the vast majority of Americans support regulations and restrictions on abortion. That is true. They support abortions through a certain point, and then after that, specifically, I would say reliably, the third trimester is when even pro-choice Americans start to say, okay, I'm not supportive of that, I don't agree with that. But when you put this question on a ballot and you ask it in such a way, which this is what they've done, I mean, the Democrats write it in a particular way that when people vote, they're forced to one side or the other. They're forced to the extremes. And as a result of that, we see like what we saw in Kansas during the midterms. We saw that all of these pro-life laws will be undone because this ballot referendum, because public opinion sways in this way, this ballot referendum will fail from the pro-life perspective. It will be successful for the pro-choice people. And the reason for that is people are more afraid of not having the option of abortion than they are concerned about third trimester abortion. And so when they're forced to the extreme, they choose the extreme that's the pro-abortion extreme. So these referendums are a huge problem. In Ohio it was a problem, in Kansas it was a problem. I would not be surprised if after next week Missouri is no longer an abortion-free state, and they've been abortion-free since prior to Roe v. Wade being overturned. So these referendums, huge issue. For abortion tourism, all of what I just laid out for you, as long as there are states that provide access to abortion, women will always be able to travel to receive those abortions. And then the fifth one, which we talked about a little bit with the timeline, but we didn't get into it too much after that, is mail order abortion. So mail order abortion has also become a huge issue in the last few years. Women can still go online and order the abortion pill. As far as I'm aware, they have not figured out how to regulate that even in pro-life states. So women in Indiana can go online and order the abortion pill and have it delivered to their house. And what we've learned is that women are actually, now they're doing this like proactively. Like before they're even pregnant, they're ordering the abortion pill and just keeping it around, almost like Plan B, because they're afraid that if they need it, they won't have access to it. Which obviously creates a whole separate slew of issues, because if a woman takes that pill and she's not actually pregnant, it is poses a serious risk to her health. Women have died from taking this pill. So that's another huge issue as well. So a federal approach being the only option. From my perspective, I think that the fact that this won't work as a state issue is more compelling than why it should be a federal issue, because the federal piece really does feel very hard. But my argument with that is overturning Roe v. Wade felt really hard, and we were able to do that in 50 years. So I think we have to start looking at this issue this way now, and we have to get every state on board, because it's going to take all of the pro-life states to really get where we need to go with the federal approach. So the first is the 14th Amendment. This is something that a lot of the pro-life organizations kind of at the higher level have been talking about since Roe v. Wade was overturned is there a way forward that we could use the 14th Amendment to restrict and ban abortion entirely in the United States? It makes a lot of sense. The 14th Amendment basically protects the rights of citizens or naturalized Americans, and it prohibits states from making laws that violate those privileges. So you would think, okay, that's the unborn. In the Constitution, it says born, like it specifically uses the word born, so that does present an obstacle, but I think, you know, the Constitution's been changed before. I would add too that one of the things I think are really interesting when you delve into some of these constitutional questions is more and more recently we're hearing Democrats and we're hearing pro-abortion activists say the Constitution's part of the problem, and the Constitution really does support what we're trying to do. You know, the Constitution really is pro-life. So I think that's something that we all have to be aware of, that the Constitution is their next move. So the 14th Amendment, pro-life organizations are actively talking about this. Kristen Hawkins at Students for Life literally held like a conference on the 14th Amendment last summer for this exact purpose of having this conversation around, is it possible that we could develop a federal approach using the 14th Amendment? The second is the full faith and credit clause. This is sometimes referred to as horizontal federalism. So basically what this refers to is how the states relate with one another under the Constitution, and then how the federal government sort of forces them to relate with one another under the Constitution. Illinois, in my opinion, is a really good example of what it looks like to seriously toe the line of violating this aspect of the Constitution. I mean, they have done everything they can possibly do to make pro-life states the enemy and to protect abusers, abortion providers, anyone who wants to perform abortion and wants to be a part of that and doesn't want to be prosecuted for it in their home state. The state of Illinois has publicly said they have no intention and no interest in honoring pro-life laws that other states have enacted. So, I mean, again, the federal government has a duty to step in and get involved and referee some of these conflicts as they arise. And we're not quite there yet, but I anticipate that we'll see this in the future. We'll see these issues arise. Third, and this is where the Catholic piece comes in. I always tell people, you know, Illinois Right to Life, we're not a Catholic organization. Everyone on our board is Catholic for the most part, and I'm personally a Catholic. So we try to keep it as secular as possible, but it's hard, particularly in these settings, because for me, my faith is a big part of why I do this. And this is the right thing for women. The stories we've heard of women who've been harmed by abortions, not just in general, but also through travel, are just wild. So this same Notre Dame conference that I went to last year, I got to visit with a Franciscan sister who works at, she works in the emergency room at a Franciscan hospital on the Indiana side of the border. And she said that not long after Roe v. Wade was overturned, they saw a huge uptick in the number of women who were coming into the emergency room with abortion-related injuries. And it's tough because they can't, you know, I have a friend who's a paramedic, and I asked him once, if you encounter a woman on a 911 call who's hemorrhaging, do you ask her any questions about whether she's just had an abortion? And he's like, no, that's not on the script. We don't talk about that. So they might ask questions about, you know, past pregnancies, et cetera, but they do not want to be responsible for that information of, was this woman just harmed by an abortion provider? The abortion providers know that these things happen. That's why when women come in and receive an abortion, they tell them, when you leave here, if you start to bleed, if you spike a fever, do not call us. Go to the emergency room. They don't want anything to do with that. The worst thing that can happen for an abortion clinic is if 911 is called to their facility. I mean, you guys know this because those calls are all publicly available. We can listen to them. We can hear what's going on inside their doors. So that's huge. This is the right thing for women. It's the right thing for the federal government to say women's lives are at risk because these states are not interested in regulating appropriately, so we need to get involved. And then it's the right thing for babies. I feel like sometimes people forget the fact that we're literally talking about child murder. That's what we're talking about. And it's not popular to say it. It's not like the politically correct way to talk about it, but that is what it is, you know? So I just think that that should be Like, let that be the period on this issue. That's what we're talking about. So why would we say, I've had Catholic pro-life people say to me, this is Illinois' problem now. This is not the federal government's problem. It's not Trump's problem. It's not J.D. Vance's problem. Now this is Illinois' problem. And my response to that is not how this works. That's not what morality is. So that's my final point on that. You had the full breath of emotion in those last two. But at that point, I would love to take questions. I'm happy to answer any and all that you might have. I've gotten some wild questions in Illinois, so sure.
So I don't really understand that. Are all of these abortion facilities that just spring up, you know, like you said in Carbondale, are they all under a Planned Parenthood umbrella? So does the money flow from there? And then I would think it would have to flow back to Illinois, because why would you fund other states' abortions if you weren't getting a cut?
Yeah. So her question was, are all of these abortion clinics in Illinois, are they all under like a Planned Parenthood umbrella? And then does that money in some capacity flow back to Illinois? Because why else would they care? Is that basically what?
Yeah, like I can't imagine they would pay for other states. I mean, Illinois is a fiscal mess, but even that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. So the way that I understand it, not all of them are Planned Parenthoods. A lot of them are independently owned. I think we have like 28 Planned Parenthoods in Illinois, so we have a lot of Planned Parenthoods. Actually, that might not be true. It might be 13 Planned Parenthoods, 28 abortion clinics, but we've since added at least 5 to 10 abortion clinics to that number. So that I think that number is old. It's from like 2018. So not all of them are Planned Parenthoods. A lot of them are Planned Parenthoods. The way that I understand it is Planned Parenthood, they're a nonprofit. They're a 501c3. They have a 501c4. They have a Planned Parenthood Action, the way that we have Illinois Right to Life Action. So through that mechanism, they can sort of get involved in politics, but really where a lot of this happens is a lot of these abortion organizations have like super PACs that they're a part of, or political action committees. And the political action committees, they're not required to disclose where that money's coming from. So like the big the big abortion PAC in Illinois is called, oh my gosh, the name's escaping me. Choices, I think. Choices PAC or something like that. But they spend millions of dollars on various campaigns and races. Planned Parenthood also does through their action committee. But I think I think the incentive is that they help these politicians get elected. So like, I can think of a handful of races right off the top of my head that those Democrats were elected and they unseated incumbent Republicans that were pro-life purely because of the money that Planned Parenthood spent on them. And once they get those people in office, they're owned by Planned Parenthood, so they can get whatever they want, you know? So that's like the win for Planned Parenthood is they own these legislators now because they're the ones who got them elected in the first place. And the legislators, I mean, I don't know, I guess they have to answer to God for why they did what they did. I will say, I think some of them genuinely think they're doing the right thing. Like Pritzker, Governor Pritzker, everyone kind of jokes he wants to run for president. So he actually, I don't know if you all know this, but he actually recently started a national abortion organization. Like, abortion is his number one issue. Why that is, I have no idea why he's chosen that, other than he sees that this is like the most critical issue that will get Democrats behind him for a primary in 4 years. But I think that's really it. I think it's the political power, and they know that if they can get Planned Parenthood to support them, Planned Parenthood will buy the race for them, and then Planned Parenthood owns them, and they are in office. So
Isn't there a lot of George Soros money behind that?
I'm sure there is. I mean, yeah,
He's like the biggest driver for that.
I think so. I'm sure that there is. Yeah. And I don't know what his mechanisms are, what his like
They're
powers
all,
are,
yeah,
but yeah.
they're all matrixed.
Yeah.
From that data, how much money are we talking about? I mean, if I do a market analysis of
Yeah.
business,
That's a great
it's a
question.
$20 billion now market, and you have a slice of it.
Yeah.
How big is that?
So I crunched the numbers. Again, it's hard because one of the other things that Governor Pritzker has done in the last few years is he has said we're no longer reporting any of this data to the public. So the last abortion numbers that we have that we weren't given to us by Planned Parenthood in a press release are from like 2020 or 2021, I think. I just totally forgot what your question was. I'm so sorry.
How big is the market?
Oh yeah, sorry.
How much money are we talking?
Yeah, so I kind of had to guess when I calculated these numbers because we don't really, it's just hard to know how many are chemical abortion versus third trimester abortion. A third trimester abortion could cost up to $10,000 to $13,000. A chemical abortion, you pay $400 or $500 for the pill. So there's just a huge range, particularly when you're dealing with health insurance. I mean, I think when the numbers were all on their lower end prior to Roe v. Wade being overturned, I think we were looking at like a $60 million industry in Illinois, which isn't huge. It doesn't fall in like the top 3 industries for the state, but that number is growing very, very quickly. And I think as we continue to see that they put these mechanisms in place for women to travel literally from all over the state. I mean, if you're pulling women from Texas, like you are a hub for the entire country. So as they continue to put these mechanisms in place for women traveling in from other parts of the country, I think that number will only continue to grow for them. And it's a mechanism for political power because then they get these people elected. Sure.
Is that data that you have available anywhere, or do you?
It's not. I don't even know if I'm supposed to be sharing it right now. It's fine. It's all HIPAA compliant. We're not going to get sued or anything. It was more so, I don't know. It's okay. But it's not available, unfortunately, and it's hard to. That's kind of one of the conversations I had with my friend who is paying for this data. Is he's like, I don't know how to share this without putting a target on our backs, and I want, if I'm going to share it, I want to share it in the right venue at the right time with the right context around it. Sure.
So back to what Chris asked about, just the monetizing it. There's also, in my mind, there are 2 incentives. One is the people that actually think it's the right, abortion is the right thing to do, and then there's the business of it. Those that are making money, and that on the back end of it is the trafficking of those, unfortunately, those babies who are aborted in the clinics. Has anyone ever been able to monetize what that is? Because when I think about Chris's question, that's where I think the big money is, that we don't see that the research money that's going into how much more that abortion is worth to that clinic provider than just what the patient paid coming in, but what they get on the back end of it.
Yeah, and it's hard to say. I don't have a lot of those numbers. I mean, I will say, like, the person, honestly, if you follow Teresa Bukoviniak at all, she used to be, she's like referred to as the pro-life atheist. She used to be in San Francisco, and she founded Pro-Life San Francisco, the organization. The University of California, San Francisco is like the largest abortion training program in the country. So I think she also is in the same circle with, all these people kind of know each other. She's in the same circle as David Daleiden and Lila Rose, so she was involved in some of that when they filmed those videos that revealed that they were selling those baby body parts for research. She would probably know more about that. She's in DC now, working for an organization called POW, which, ironically, same type of stuff. A lot of the people that worked for her organization are the people that are in federal prison for violating the FACE Act. So I don't know. I mean, I will say, Pritzker is trying to set that up in Illinois. So I think it's possible that you're right, that there is research that they're trying to, I mean, I think the University of Illinois Chicago is dabbling in that.
But there's money behind it, is my point. There's another market to this ecosystem than simply what the patient is paying the provider.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Yeah. Sure.
It's really just kind of more of a comment. Sorry if it seems kind of harsh, but I moved out of Illinois just a couple of years ago, so I know all about Pritzker and all that. But I just find the thing that frustrates me about the whole pro-choice is just the language when we have these conversations. It's so sanitized. Like even the word abortion, it just really doesn't mean anything.
It's reproductive health.
It is. It's women's health, and it really is infanticide. And I just find it really so disgusting that Pritzker, this is his #1 issue, when he's so proud of funding and building the Holocaust Museum in Skokie that documents the slaughter of a whole classification of people, and then he's going to run for president on an issue which promotes the slaughter of a whole class of people, which is the whole
Totally.
point.
Based on how the
And
Nazis did it.
Right, right.
Dedicated.
And so that never really, that whole, I just wish that the language could change so that people could understand what is really happening, and it's very brutal language.
Yeah.
But it's brutal.
Yeah.
It's a brutal thing.
Just a point to add to that, the company that manufactures the chemical abortion pill, its parent company is the same company that performed the sterilization or manufactured the sterilization drugs that they used on a lot of people in the concentration camps in Germany.
And Margaret
So
Sanger learned
The
her.
connections
Yeah,
are
links.
very real, and these are, I mean, this is not conspiratorial stuff, this is
No,
like
it's very-
confirmed with
Mhm.
paper behind it.
Mhm.
I totally agree with you, and it's really hard because like for organizations like us, there's a constant debate going on behind the scenes. I mean, again, like Students for Life is a great example. I give Kristen a lot of credit. She has done a lot of polling on language and how should we talk about the abortion issue. And it's hard because you're exactly right. Like when I use language like this, I'm in a certain sense condoning the sterilizing that they're doing of the issue that we're talking about. But on the flip side of that, if you don't engage with that, people won't listen to you, you know? It's like this, we're like caught in this contradictory situation. It's very unfortunate, I totally agree, yeah.
Sure. Have the Catholic hospitals in Illinois been able to like stay away from performing abortions?
There are only a few Catholic hospitals that don't perform
Oh,
abortions
really?
in Illinois. Yeah, actually the number one hospital in the state for abortion is on the west side of Chicago, and it's a Catholic hospital. It's a very small, it's St. Anthony's, St. Anthony Catholic Hospital, I think is what it's called. Yeah, so, sure.
I had a question about the abortion pill, but I also have a question for anybody here. I saw statistics in the last couple of weeks popped up on my feed, and it showed the statistics for 2024 for the number of abortions in going from Indiana into Illinois, Indiana to Michigan, Indiana to Ohio. And I'm questioning if anybody saw it, because I thought it was very disturbing to me, and I don't know where I saw it, okay? But it showed about 5,600, I think, to 6,000 went into Illinois this year. And I think 500 something went to Michigan, and then another maybe 700 went to Ohio. And when I totaled those up, I went, okay, this is only October. We got 2 or 3 more months. We're gonna have Indiana people getting abortions is gonna bypass what it did the last year they were legal here.
Yeah.
And I just like, but I can't tell you where I got it. I've gone back to try to figure out where I saw it, because I get so much pro-life stuff.
Yeah.
But then the other thing I question you is, do you have any idea what proportion of people are actually going into Illinois just to get the pill?
Right.
Not, like you said, the woman's doing surgical abortions in Illinois,
Right.
that doctor.
Right.
If she's just going over to prescribe the pill, or is she actually doing surgical abortions? Because,
Yeah, that's a good question.
because it's,
not
I mean,
sure.
the strange thing is right now is, they could do that, and we had the last abortionist, the one who left, or who moved from West 16th Street, they had gone from doing, 100% surgical abortions 10 years ago, down to like the last 2 years before they were open, doing 85% pill. So are these women all going out of state to get the pill and coming back, take a train? I mean,
Well, I think it's hard to know.
Yeah.
I
You
mean,
have no way
the
of knowing
vast,
statistics.
yeah, right. The vast majority, and this is where it gets a little scary when you really start to get into the weeds on this stuff, because you're like, we actually don't really know how many abortions are happening, because, first of all, any woman can order it to her house nowadays, which is like what I've said before, but also, we just don't know that they're tracking them that closely. Like, it's just too easy. It's too easy to give them a pill. And I think that there's a lot of fear around tracking as well. I mean, now it's not being reported at the state level. So like, who's enforcing that these abortion clinics are even tracking to begin with? And that's a question that we in Illinois have had for a long time, is how do we know that they're supposed to file a report every time they, prescribe the abortion pill. How do we know that they're actually doing that? I mean, and not to mention, and this is all not even to mention the fact that they intentionally conflate the abortion pill with emergency contraception.
Yeah.
So if all of that is true, what incentive do they have to be honest with us about how many chemical abortions are actually happening? Because we know the majority of abortions are happening with the chemical abortion pill. So I don't know the answer to your question, and it's kind of a scary question.
It sort of just seems bizarre for people to fly from Texas to Illinois to
Right.
to get a pill.
Right.
And that just is.
Well, and the other piece of that is I think that they've been very intentional about confusing people,
Yes.
you know, like I think.
You need to come.
Right, exactly. You have to do that, and you're gonna run out of time. That's their big thing. That's their big thing with the chemical abortion pill is they're like, you have to take the pill before that 10-week mark because after that, now it's a big deal. But really, what they're thinking is we don't want you to have an ultrasound and for that baby to look like a baby because if that baby looks like a baby, 99% of the time you're gonna decide to keep, and we're out of luck. So yeah, it's hard to know. And I mean, you hear so many different stories on abortion numbers these days. Like I feel like we've heard people say that they're up nationally and that a lot of that has to do with like the funding. There's just so much funding for abortion. It's so easy for people now. They're getting them for free. It's just, I don't know. Sure.
Well, number one, I commend you on what you're doing and educating
Thank you.
us, but, I mean, where do you see the light? I mean, to do this volunteer, I mean,
Yeah.
I commend you, like I say, but
Thank you.
I just wish that there was more that we could all do besides the hoping for the 14th Amendment.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. A couple of years ago, I read something, and I don't even remember what it was or where I read it, but it was like from a saint. And it was basically something that gave me this conviction that we are dignifying the unborn just by doing the work. And that it's not about the success of it, it's about the physical, like the activity, like actually doing it. And that just really convicted me. And you know, it's really interesting because, so I don't know if any of you are familiar with Pro-Life Action League, Joe Scheidler and Eric Scheidler. The Scheidlers are good friends. And I had lunch with Eric and some of his team a couple weeks ago. I don't think he would care if I was saying this publicly. But one of the debates that we were kind of having at our lunch is it worth it to settle for a quote unquote pro-abortion law if it means limiting abortion to like a certain degree? Like, is the goal to end abortion or is the goal to save lives? And I actually don't agree with the approach that like we should settle for certain restrictions because we'd rather that than abortion through a third trimester. I don't actually agree with that. I think that like we have a duty to tell the truth. The truth is that it's all murder, it's all killing, all of these babies that have dignity. And so it's like a point of disagreement inside of the movement in terms of that approach. But for me, that's where I draw hope from, is like, if we're willing to just settle and say, okay, well, we're fine with you killing these babies, we're just not fine with you killing these babies, what is the point? we've lost sight of the point, you know? Sure.
One of the things I have to say, I've worked for Right to Life in Indianapolis for 17 years, and one of the things that I have to say is I have to thank all the people who've been doing things since the 70s. We have some people still involved in it. But I also think when we talk about doing that, I agree with you. But if we talk about that and then we say, okay, there's other people who say we shouldn't do that, the biggest problem in the pro-life movement is if we become at odds.
Totally.
So we can't become at odds. I can disagree with what you think, but criticizing other groups has become detrimental in Indiana in some places.
Yeah.
So I think we've got to be very careful. We all want the best. Some of us believe those steps are different, but we cannot be divided.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that healthy tension is how we overturned Roe v. Wade, because there was so much conversation behind the scenes of what kind of case does this have to be, what does this need to look like, and we were able to facilitate that situation, and then, you know, here we are. So I totally agree. Yeah. Sure.
I know from what you said, it's really difficult to get statistics, but in terms of the injury to women, it must be up. Is it a way that we can gather that information to impact people, that this is a dangerous, bad thing to do?
Yep. So there is a way that we can do it. It's really hard. So this data that is available through the clearinghouses, one of the things that the consulting agency that we got this data from that they would eventually like to do, it's just very expensive, is you can aggregate that data. So you can basically say, okay, assign a number to all of these patients. All of these patients received abortions in this window of time, and then they were in the emergency room and they had coding for hemorrhage or perforated uterus or something else in this period of time. So we're able to put the two together and see that they were injured by their abortion, and we can, like, you know, you aggregate that and put it all together, and then you're able to come up with some numbers on injury, because the emergency rooms won't disclose that. They'll say it's HIPAA compliance, but it's funny, like, we study all these other things, but then for some reason it's impossible to get this data. So it is possible. It's incredibly expensive. I mean, we talked with them about raising the money to do it, and it was gonna be like $200,000 or $300,000 just for our portion of that, and we were gonna have to go out and get other organizations to contribute that same amount of money. And it's not that it's not possible, it's just that once you have that data, what do you do with it? And then you hope that people take it seriously and that they don't just kind of like brush it off because, you know, the media is not on our side. So it's very hard. But I mean, we know that that's happening. The other one that they would like to do that with is substance abuse and mental health outcomes, because there's clearly, statistics show that there is clearly a correlation between being post-abortive and having severe mental health issues, being suicidal, and also substance abuse issues. But everybody you'll talk to on the other side will say, well, you know, women who have mental health issues are more likely to choose abortion, and they make it look like it's like it's not causal, it's more so just something that comes together. But I mean, I think we could challenge that for sure. So people are talking about that. It's just a question, it's a constant problem solving of like, how do we actually make that happen?
It seems as though if you were going to court, the statistics that we're showing, not only are we killing babies, we are also maiming women. So it's detrimental on a number of fronts, and we ought to be able to go to court and convince people that this is bad all the way around.
Yeah. Well, in Chicago, for example, like, we have record that over the last 50 years, 10 women have died in abortion clinics in Chicago. And one of the families successfully sued the abortion provider over it. But the laws now make it very hard. I mean, like I said, the coroner can't even go in and perform an autopsy if something like that happens, according to the law, which you're like, how is that even, how does that even make sense? But that's, you know, it's, again, why it's a federal issue, because the state of Illinois cannot be relied upon to defend anybody's health.
It's an interesting idea, though, if you had a cadre of pro-life lawyers who would take this on.
Yeah.
If you had 9 lawyers suing on behalf of the other 9 women,
Yeah.
Maybe they would pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Sure.
How do they obtain the chemical pill for abortion? Can they just walk in to the counter? Do they have to have a prescription? What information do they have? Like these college girls, do they have to have a prescription to go in and get it?
So, well, that's a great question. So nowadays they do have to have a prescription. They have to go, they
To the
can
doctor.
get it at a retail pharmacy now. As of about a year ago, or January of this year, they can get it from a retail pharmacy. So CVS and Walgreens.
But they have to have a doctor's
They have to have a
prescription
prescription.
to go. And then when they get it, what kind of information? You're dealing with something that's not a vitamin, for God's sake.
Right. So, well, that was the, previously the FDA rule was your doctor has to physically hand this to you, like it wasn't even available in retail pharmacies. The retail pharmacy rule is new as of the Biden administration, and they put that into place 2 years ago, and then it went into effect in January of this year. So they no longer, the rule is no longer that the doctor has to be, like, physically give that pill to the woman. She can just go to CVS or Walgreens and get it as long as she has a prescription. And that's, to your point, that was exactly the reason for that initially, is that this is a dangerous chemical pill that we're giving to people. Like I said, I think 28 women have died in the United States from taking this pill. It's pretty horrific. Sure.
Kind of three questions. Is most of the political power in Illinois coming out of Chicago?
Yeah.
Because it's so big. Are there any other countries in the world that have completely stopped abortions, or are they limited? And the third question is, how did it become politically such a party issue? I see plenty of signs in this neighborhood that are supporting political candidates who are very pro-abortion, yet they're in mass every week. And so how did it become, what is the power they're gaining politically, and how are they using that power to take such a moral issue to gain political power as opposed to moral power? And what are the things that pro-life people can do to bring it back to a moral issue? Or is that, are those days gone?
Yeah, the last question is the hardest question for me to answer. Your first question was about, I answered it, Chicago. Yeah, so basically, Chicago is like notoriously corrupt for our politics.
And they're using it for the power.
Correct, yeah, and they've done so much redistricting over the years that even districts that were previously held by Republicans are now like so gerrymandered that Democrats are in all of them. So yeah, that's the really hard thing. Countries, so I don't know the answer to your question about is abortion banned in any countries. I'm pretty confident that that's the case though, because I actually think the majority of other countries do not allow legal abortion. The United States is like is in the top 10 for how accessible abortion is. We are like one of the most accessible countries in the world when it comes to abortion access. I mean, countries like Poland, for example, I'm pretty sure abortion is completely illegal in Poland. I think there are a lot of countries that it's illegal. And again, that's kind of one of the funny things is, I think I saw something at some point that abortion is more accessible in the United States than it is in North Korea, which you're just like, that's backwards. So that's the bleak reality there. But also at the same time, it's a little bit positive because I think we can kind of look at that and affirm where we stand in that, okay, we're not crazy here. The United States is just off the rails for whatever reason. In terms of the political power question, so this is kind of funny. A couple of years ago, we used to have an office in the suburbs in addition to our office in the city. I went out to the suburb office to pack it up because it was just kind of full of junk and we were not going to use it anymore. And our organization's been around for 60 years. So there were a lot of boxes of, old papers and things. And in the boxes, I found a letter from Mike Madigan, our, infamous Speaker of the House, who was indicted in the last couple of years. He had written us a letter in the 80s that said, it had a picture of his face on it, and it was, had a signature on it, and it said, as long as Mike Madigan is down in Springfield, Illinois Right to Life will have a friend for the unborn or something. And Mike Madigan was Speaker of the House when this Reproductive Health Act was passed that took all the regulations off the books. So he is a really good example of how political power just rots your brain. I think with the Democratic Party specifically, I think a lot of these people started out pro-life. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that the Democrats were the more pro-life and the Republicans, I think.
When I was 18, that's when Roe was passed.
Yeah.
And what I can remember is that there was turmoil in neighborhoods like this within families. It wasn't a discussion of what party were you in. It was a discussion, is this right or wrong? And now, there's no discussion as to this is the wrong thing to do. This is what my party supports, so this is what I support. And it's like we can't get it off of the political power and back to right and wrong.
Yeah. I will say, I think that there are more individual people who identify as blue collar Democrats who are pro-life. I think there are more of those people than we know. Maybe not necessarily in metropolitan areas like Chicago or Indianapolis, but I think when you get into like the Virginias or like some of these more remote areas or these more blue collar rural areas, you see a lot more of the true old school Democrats, and a lot of them are pro-life. The Democratic Party, they're the ones who decided that pro-life people were not welcome in their party anymore. I mean, they made that decision for their party. In the Republican Party, so like before I started with Illinois Rights Life, I worked in Republican politics. So I worked on a gubernatorial campaign, a presidential campaign, I worked on a congressional campaign. I was always like the redheaded stepchild because the life issue was the most important issue to me. Republicans, when you get into like people who actually work for the Republican Party, they really could care less. I mean, you know, I plan to vote for Donald Trump. Obviously he's the better choice than Kamala Harris, but I don't actually believe that his version of the Republican Party is a more pro-life version. I think they just realized that this was the issue that was gonna get them where they wanted to be in the 2016 election. And I think that was really smart of them because that's exactly what happened. So, I mean, I say that not to be bleak so much as I actually do think it's kind of encouraging, because I think what we're seeing, at least in my generation, is that the pro-life issue is leading people to the party that is taking on that issue. Which like 20 and 30 years ago, both parties were kind of ignoring the issue to a degree. They were like, we just don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. The Republicans were kind of forced into it with Trump. I mean, so they changed their party platform at the convention just a few months ago. So now they're no longer talking about federal abortion according to the party platform. They're also no longer talking about traditional marriage according to the party platform, which I feel like a lot of people kind of miss that. But nevertheless, I think, I'm not sure that it's as far off from the experience you remember having with Roe v. Wade as you think it is, because I also think abortion will always be it will always cross party lines, because there will always be at least a handful of people in the room who've been personally touched by abortion regardless of what room you're in. I mean, that's a big thing that we talk about at the Catholic churches, because there are far more post-abortive women at the Catholic churches than I think a lot of our pastors are aware of and a lot of our parishioners are aware of. And so that's something, A, that we have to be sensitive to, but B, I think also that we have to consider, because those women have really powerful stories that they're able to share, and I have always been really inspired by those women. I think that that's, like, they're driving a lot of the positive activity because they've experienced it firsthand, what it does to you and what it does to your family. And I think that that's where a lot of our successes actually come from, is post-abortive women, so.
I think that, I'm not sure of the exact date, I think it was early 1980s, when the Democrats put abortion in their platform. Because I was a Democrat and I could not stay with them any longer.
Yep, that makes sense.
And
Yeah, that
and
makes
that,
sense.
they actually put it in their
Yeah,
platform.
that makes sense. And it's, I mean, I don't know if any of you watched the convention, but like, they talked about it the whole time at the convention, which was pretty wild.
Is there any regulation against people setting up these abortion clinics? Do they have to have licensure of any kind? Do they have nothing?
No.
XYZ can go in and set it up, but they get a lot of help and advice from Planned Parenthood. Just saying.
I don't know if Planned Parenthood helps them necessarily. I mean, the state will help them. Illinois will help them. Like Pritzker's programs will help them.
But they're just sitting out there in the open, and you can walk in and say, I want an abortion.
Yep.
And there's no limitation on the viability of the fetus.
No, so they say in the law, they say 26 weeks is viability. I don't know where they got that from, because no doctor has said 26 weeks. I mean, the youngest baby that's ever lived born prematurely was born at 22 weeks, and that's becoming more and more common. So 26 weeks viable is not a thing. I don't know why they chose that number, but they don't do any kind of checking. I think they stretch that all the time. I mean, at one point I was on, there's an abortion clinic down by St. Louis called Hope Clinic, ironically. And at one point I was on their website and they were openly advertising abortions through the 27th or 28th week, which is explicitly against the law in Illinois. But I don't think that they again, we have no way of knowing if anyone's enforcing it because they're kind of self-enforcing, you know, so, sure.
Did I hear you say earlier in your presentation that Michael Jackson died?
Yeah, I remember exactly where I was. I was working at a t-shirt shop when I was 17 and I was folding t-shirts and it said it on the radio and I was like, oh my gosh.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Who's that? So often we hear about the due date of a woman. How accurate is that? I mean, when a woman goes into to the OBGYN and she's
Yeah.
told, yes, you're pregnant and your due date is this,
Yeah.
how accurate is that?
Well, that's a really good question. So your due date is based on 40 weeks after your last period, which is not when you actually conceived. So technically the due date is always wrong to some degree, but we really have no way of
So how can you
knowing.
say, viability?
Yeah,
after
it's a
this?
great point. You're exactly right. Yeah.
They actually have a new formula for determining when somebody actually conceives, so you can get a more accurate date. I don't know what the formula is, but they do have a new way of doing it that's actually more
Yeah.
accurate than the
Yeah.
really conceived portion,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool.
Sure.
At one time, I was secretary for Right to Life in Madison County, Illinois, and we were talking
Oh.
about Fairview Heights, which
Yeah.
is right next door.
Yeah.
We discussed and we thought so much about alternatives. We never felt like the girls felt like they had to have abortions, but why weren't we offering them an alternative, adoption, or some kind of help, something that we can do to foster,
Yeah.
these women?
Yeah.
And we have in our churches in Illinois, we had some that actually started groups in the church, and invited these girls in, helped them beforehand, and helped them afterwards with the babies, gave them training as to how to care for them, or helped them to put them up for adoption. Adoption, my youngest son has adopted 3 children. They unfortunately could not have children. And each child cost him $90,000. Added up. That's not including all the costs once you have them. And it's just like, there should be some way where adoption is less expensive. Where through the churches, through the Catholic Church or any other church, that we can help these women.
Yeah.
Some of them look at it as their only alternative. We know it isn't, but how are we not helping them to find that other way?
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with you. There's an organization out of Texas called Human Coalition, which you may or may not have heard of. They come and try to fly under the radar, but their whole model is they basically created like a call center inside of Texas, and they work with pregnancy centers all over the country. So they have women who call their call center looking for an abortion or looking for pregnancy help or whatever, and then they reroute her to a local pregnancy center in her area. It's kind of the layman's terms. And they've done a lot of study on their script. So the questions that they ask the women and the things that she say and what they say in response to her based on that. And one of the things that they've landed on that they feel is most important for a pregnancy center counseling a woman is that when you get her to stop seeing the pregnancy as the problem, and you say to her, like, what are the other things going on in your life? She's like, and she says things like, I don't have a place to live, or my boyfriend is abusive, or my parents aren't supportive of my pregnancy, or I'm in school, or whatever. When you identify the other problems and you offer her solutions to those problems, they discovered that very quickly the pregnancy no longer felt like a problem to her. That it was actually all these other things going on in her life that were the problem. And the pregnancy, the problem was just making it impossible for her to move forward with the pregnancy. But once you alleviate the other problems, the pregnancy, she typically, I don't know the exact stat, but the vast majority of the time wants to keep the baby.
That's kind of a national thing, and I understand that because I know that's true. But it has to be localized. You can't wait for a group of Texas to automatically send them somewhere else in the country. How many people are gonna contact them?
Yeah.
I think it needs to be county, city, church. It needs to be a coordinated effort in order to give options. Because I saw how successful it was when you contacted these people. And they had some other resource other than abortion.
Yeah.
you know, we have to give them an alternative.
Sure. Yep. Any other questions? I feel like we could go all night.
Are you saying then that in Indiana,
Mhm.
a woman could get a prescription from her doctor and go to CVS or Walgreens or something and get it?
I don't believe so. And well, and actually, so an aside to this, I don't know if any of you saw this article in the, I had a slide on it and I just didn't use it. Did any of you see this article? So this, I encourage you all to go find the article and read it. It was in the Indiana Capital Chronicle like 2 or 3 days ago. It was printed. This woman has 2 sons. She's married. She found out she was pregnant. Her baby was diagnosed with a neural tube defect in utero, and she basically said, "I know it's a baby. I could see fingers and toes and arms and legs on the ultrasound. I just don't want to affect the quality of life of my living family members, so I traveled to Illinois to terminate this pregnancy." And she said, technically under Indiana law, I could have terminated in the state of Indiana. I think she was 16 weeks. But she was like, I didn't want to go through the process that they were making me go through, so instead I just went to Planned Parenthood in Illinois and had them terminate the pregnancy for me. She basically, like, you know, justifies eugenics in this whole story. It's very sad. It's very sad that there are people who think that this is their only option. Why was I talking about this? I don't remember why I was talking about that. Oh, I'm sorry.
If the woman could go to her doctor and get a prescription and go to the
Yes.
pharmacist, cause I didn't think they could do that.
So in Indiana,
Yeah.
I would assume, I mean, all elective abortion is banned, correct me if I'm wrong, that's not, so the
Well,
answer
there
is
certain
no.
restrictions, you have to do it in the hospital.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
so and it has to be health of the woman or a fatal prognosis on the
Yeah, and that woman could have
long-term.
gone to the hospital.
She,
Yeah.
yes, she could have, and she
Yeah.
acknowledges that in
Yeah.
the, but no, so they, in the state of
Okay.
Indiana, they can't
I
go
didn't
and get a
think so.
prescription.
Okay.
They could do mail order,
Yeah,
and
Yeah.
order it online and have it sent to their
And
house.
nobody would know.
As far as
Yeah.
I'm aware, yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, they could, but I don't believe that they could go to retail.
we better start praying for your governor to have a conversion. And really,
Yeah.
all the
well,
abortionists, we probably should do that better.
Yeah.
Pray for them more if they have a conversion.
Yeah. Well, you know, so I don't remember his name. The abortionist that operated the abortion clinic across from the Women's Care Center in South Bend for many, many years. He retired. There were news stories about him recently because he actually lived in Illinois across the border, and after he died, they found the yes, Klopfer. Is that who it was? Yeah, it was Klopfer. The last years of his life, he would go and sit in the Eucharistic Adoration Chapel at Women's Care Center.
Really?
For a long time. I think he did it almost daily. Would go sit in that. Isn't that wild? So he clearly still had unresolved issues because of all the things that they found. But you know, I mean, prayer is effective. So sure.
We spoke earlier about other countries and how they're handling abortions. It's my understanding that a number of countries, I think Iceland being one of them, has a vow, has a mission to make their
To
country
eradicate
totally
Down syndrome.
Down syndrome. My youngest sister was Down syndrome.
Yeah.
I could go too far with this, but she lived one of the most incredible lives you could ever imagine.
Yeah, it's very sad that people feel so afraid of disabilities. Yeah. And Iceland, I think, has come very close to eradicating Down. They say they've eradicated Down syndrome, but they just kill all the persons. Yeah. Sure.
I had a question. So I've listened to some podcasts and just seen some statements from doctors who are OBGYNs and they're pro-life, and they have stated that there's no medical necessity to provide an abortion for the health of the mother. But then when you read these laws, they're saying, okay, you can have an abortion if the mother's health is in danger. So how are those two like reconciled? Is there actually a medical reason? Because I know these doctors are saying the solution is delivery.
Yeah.
But then these laws are saying the solution is abortion.
It's one of those things like that people say when the only tool in your toolbox is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. A lot of these doctors, like some of these OBGYNs, I have to give them the benefit of the doubt because I think they really believe that they're doing what's right. So like ectopic pregnancy is the number one example that people use for this. So I gave a similar presentation to this. It was different, but similar 4 or 5 years ago, and there was a it's gotta be pregnancy brain, I just can't remember. There was a neonatal physician in the who was at the event, and this was the exact question that someone brought up, and she actually stood up and answered it, and she said, when you have an ectopic pregnancy, there are a couple of things that can happen. First of all, typically it passes so quickly in women that they don't even know that they had an ectopic pregnancy, because the fallopian tubes are not conducive to growing a human life. Like there's no nutrition being provided, so the fetus can't grow. So she was like, that's the first issue. If for whatever reason the egg does continue to grow, it is true that your fallopian tubes can rupture. And she says this is where we get into like, what is the definition of an abortion? It's like the taking of a human life inside of the womb. So the church has said, I mean, the church has done so much study on like the ethics, medical ethics, and like the things that are considered ethical and not considered ethical. And the church has said that the ethical way to respond to an ectopic pregnancy is you can actually remove that piece of the fallopian tube where the baby has impacted itself. You remove that piece of the fallopian tube, the baby will die, obviously. The egg will die, or the fertilized egg will die naturally. And you can reconnect the woman's fallopian tube. And there are women who've had this procedure and go on to have perfectly healthy pregnancies. But to an OBGYN who has no conviction for not killing that fertilized egg, they will give women a pill that, you know, it's essentially the chemical abortion pill, that it will kill the fetus, cause the woman to go into labor, and then she'll expel, you know, whatever tissue has gathered in that short period of time. But that is an abortion versus not. And all these things feel like very nuanced. Like I think a lot of pro-choice people roll their eyes and they're like, why should we care about going to such lengths for a little clump of tissue? But that's where like the dignity aspect comes in. And so I think that would be true for anything, you know. Well, the harder examples, so like St. Gianna Beretta Mola, she had a cancer diagnosis. She chose not to go through with the treatment because she was pregnant at the time. Her daughter was born, and she did ultimately die from not receiving that treatment. So it's a tough thing because like, can you make the argument that like she should have received that treatment? I think the church actually would have been justified and considered ethical by the church. I think that was just her choice, that she didn't want her baby to die. But point being, it's amazing. I personally believe that Catholic doctors can be credited with so many incredible, like miraculous developments in medicine, because they're the ones that are actually interested in asking the question. Because everyone else is like, I'm just gonna do, you know, hammer, nail. They're not actually like asking the question. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but there are always other options, and there have been a lot of OBGYNs who have said publicly that this is, you know, I recently saw a tweet of some OBGYN who said, I've performed something like 2,000 life-saving surgeries on women who have been pregnant, and never once did I have to abort a child to save her life. Like, this just doesn't exist. So that's basically it. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.